Good evening. I'm Don Michaels, the Director of the University Honors Program, and I want to welcome you all as the newest members of the honors community. The mission of the honors program is to offer high-achieving students an enhanced educational experience centered around small, discussion-based seminars that emphasize critical thinking, creativity and problem solving, interdisciplinary learning, professionalism, and effective communication. Simply put, we are here to help you become better people. You are joining a community of over 1,700 honors scholars, representing every major across campus. You are among 449 new students, and here's a brief snapshot of this population. Colorado residents make up 50% of the first-year class. Our non-residents come from 42 states, with the greatest numbers from California, and Texas, and Illinois. 73% are female, and 23% are ethnically diverse. All this diversity provides a rich environment for learning and exposure to new ideas, life experiences, interests, and perspectives. Regardless of background, you all share core values, and those are a passion for learning, a commitment to serve the larger community, and an ethic for continual self-improvement. I urge you to embrace the many opportunities that lie ahead, take some risks, try new things, but most importantly, have fun. The honors faculty, staff, and peer mentors are excited to have you here. Now I'd like to introduce Mary Pedersen, our new provost and executive vice president.
Thank you so much, Don, and welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you in your first couple days on campus, and I am new to CSU, Colorado State University also. This is my third week, and so just as many of you are learning your way around, I'm doing the same thing. And I'm not new to honors programs though, and I have been very, very engaged in honors programs for many years, and I'm really excited that you've chosen to be part of this wonderful opportunity, because you're going to have the opportunity to engage with small groups of students and very wonderful connections with your faculty in really small settings. In the seminars that you're going to be taking, you're going to have the opportunity to really develop a community, and I think that's one of the really important things for you to do as you start your educational career, is to really find your community and feel a part of the CSU RAM family. And so I encourage you to look for opportunities to engage, and I know that your honors program is going to provide a lot of opportunities for you, and embrace those opportunities. I also want to encourage you, as we're beginning a fall semester that we've never entered into before, that you would be very, very cognizant of this. Next week or two are going to be really critical. Wear your mask. Please be sure to wear your mask. Anytime that you're outdoors in your classrooms, the mask is really critical. And I hope all of you have gotten tested. If you haven't, please get tested. We are doing our very, very best to have a successful semester for you, and that really requires for you to follow the protocol for testing, wearing a mask, social distancing, and good hygiene, because we have been working, the faculty have been working literally all summer. All of the staff have been working hard to make the campus a wonderful, safe place for you, and we really want your beginning of your college career to be successful. And so I look forward to the opportunity to actually meeting many of you, and I will do that when I have the opportunity, and look forward to Don inviting me to different groups that we can social distance and interact. I look forward to learning more about your program and ways that we can support it. And I'm very honored to be here and being introduced, but then right before your wonderful guest speaker. And so again, reach out to all of your peer mentors. You know, having the peer mentors that you have is an incredible opportunity. Use them, lean on them. They're really valuable for you as you're developing your community. So welcome and enjoy this wonderful presentation. I'll turn it back to you, Don, for introducing our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. It is indeed a privilege to have Dr. Temple Grandin speak to us tonight to kick off the academic year. This coming year, you will learn what it means to be part of this community through the honor seminars, recitations, residential learning community, and activities. This lecture is intended as the start of this process, as it provides a unique experience and a lasting memory that you will share with your fellow students. Dr. Grandin is Professor of Animal Sciences and is, without a doubt, the most famous person at CSU. Her courses are in high demand and often fill within minutes after registration opens. Dr. Grandin has an international reputation for the design of animal handling facilities and for the ethical treatment of animals. She has received numerous awards and recognitions. In 2016, she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She has authored over 60 publications and 15 books. We at CSU are justifiably proud of having Dr. Grandin as a distinguished member of our faculty. She represents the best of our university, an outstanding scholar, teacher, and mentor who provides valuable service to the livestock industry, as well as informing the general public about autism spectrum conditions. Dr. Grandin?
Well, it's wonderful to be here tonight virtually. A lot of things to talk about tonight. What I want to get you thinking about is different ways that people think. When I wrote one of my early books, it's 25 years ago, Thinking in Pictures, I thought everybody thought in pictures the way I thought. I've now learned some people think mathematically, some people think in words. But what I want to ask you is, let's look at some great minds of the past. What would happen to Michelangelo in today's school system? He was a 6th grade dropout, loved art, grew up in an environment exposed to art and stone cutting tools. Beethoven went deaf when he wrote some of his greatest pieces. What would happen to them today? Here's some of Michelangelo's art. His dad wanted him to basically become a lawyer and write business contracts in Latin. And little Michael goes, I don't want to do that. Now, one of the things that helped him to be successful is in the world he was in, there was all kinds of art being done all over the place. You'd be a total visual thinker the way I am. And Beethoven, he did his greatest, some of his greatest music after he went deaf, had to give up performing, and he kept persevering. In fact, he built, had a piano company build things on his piano to help him hear. He wrote Ode to Joy when he was stone deaf. He could just feel the vibrations. Now, being different, I didn't talk until age 4. I was bullied and teased in school. And I'll tell you one thing, starting out in the cattle industry back in the 70s in Arizona, being a woman was a really much bigger barrier than autism ever was. And when you're different, you got to make yourself really good at what you do. Now, I've since learned that there's different types of thinking, and I've been reviewing the literature some more, and there's more and more literature that shows that some people are object visualizers. They're going to be good at things like fine arts, graphic design. They're also going to be very good at really clever engineering, mechanical devices, because they can see how they work. Now, a lot of people that are in computers and physics, they're the visual spatial thinker. And there's research now that shows that these two kinds of thinking are kind of opposite. And they have skills that complement each other. Think about the iPhone. Steve Jobs was an artist. That's why the phone's easy to use. Well, the other kinds of engineers had to make that phone work. And then you've got the verbal thinker. Right now I'm working on a new book on visual thinking, working with my really great co-author Betsy Lerner. She's a complete verbal thinker, and we've got to learn to communicate. But the first step is realizing that there are different kinds of thinking, and we need all of the different kinds of minds in order to solve problems. Turns out I've got a big visual thinking circuit in my brain. That was kind of a mind blower, getting those scans. There's another picture of it. And the one thing I absolutely couldn't do is algebra. I'm the kind of kid today that gets screened out because I can't do algebra. Still can't do algebra. It's too abstract. And what I'm going to be doing in my new book is showing we need our visual thinkers. We can't be screening them out. You see, as a visualizer, I can see things. Okay, right now we know in COVID that one of the biggest ways that COVID is spread is crowded, tight airspaces. I had that figured out in May. Cruise ship, prison, meatpacking plant locker room. These are places where you got a bunch of people jammed in together. Tight airspaces. Major, big, source of infection. One of the problems I have is I don't have very much working memory. If I was a computer, I got the cloud for memory, if I can convert it into a graphics file, but I'm only an Intel 286. I don't have very much working memory. Well, teachers often ask me, how do you figure out what kind of thinker a kid is? Well, when they get to be 6, 7, or 8 years old, the visual thinkers love art, building things. They're often the mechanic who can design absolutely anything. The math thinkers, we got a lot of those in the honors program. But I'm going to show you that you need our kinds of minds. You need us visual thinkers. Think about something like the Mars rover. Who do you think made that in the machine shop? I've been to some of these places. I was just the other day looking at a very fancy building at a very fancy tech place. And I was thinking, I didn't like the fact that my department got stuck in the basement with the cable trays. You need us. And I'm going to show you why. You need us visual thinkers that can't do math. We need all the different kinds of minds. I had a great trip going down to Cape Canaveral, looking at the vehicle assembly building, thinking about when we went to the moon. I totally geeked out over the SpaceX launch, completely geeked out. I watched 2.5 hours of live broadcasts as it docked with the space station. Most people don't do that. I do. See, the thing is, as a person with autism, I get turned on by really cool stuff, like SpaceX docking with the space station. Really super cool. You see, a mind can be more thinking, or a mind can be more social emotional. What point do you slap a label on it? Same thing in animals. You got the really social animals, and then you got panthers and leopards. They'd be the autistic people of the animal world. Are the panthers and leopards abnormal? No, they're not. But it's a continuous trait. Yep, I have to say, visiting that was really cool. Now, it took different kinds of minds to do the space program. Katherine Johnson, who by hand did the calculations for the first orbital flight and the suborbital flights, Mercury and Apollo, finally now getting recognized. Engineers managed the program. Now the visual thinkers are finally getting recognized. Who do you think made the spacesuit? Latex. IPC, nobody told you what IPC stands for, International Playtex Company. They won the bid. 4 of the finest bra seamstresses sewed the spacesuit. And there was kind of like a lot of fighting going on between the more degreed engineers and what I'm going to call the clever engineering department. But the thing is, you need all the different kinds of minds. The right stuff maybe rode the rockets to the moon, but when I visited Cape Kennedy, I found out a guy with Tourette's was in charge of building this launch pad. The special ed department ends up building the stuff. When I was out working in construction, I was working on Montfort's and some of these companies back in the 80s and the 90s, I'm going to estimate that maybe 20% of the people I worked with, welders, machinery designers, drafting people, would be autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD today. And we need the different minds. My grandfather, traditional MIT-trained engineer, was the co-inventor of the automatic pilot for airplanes. And he worked with another guy who came up with this crazy idea for 3 little coils that people in aviation thought was really stupid. because an autopilot has to be connected to the compass needle. Well, my grandfather looked at this wild idea and goes, yeah, I can make this work. Original things don't get done in company labs by company people, my grandfather said, and they made it work. And the happiest that my grandfather was in his whole life was when a plane went from Chicago to New York with the pilots not touching the controls. The autopilot worked. I'm seeing too many kids today to get labeled autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, and I get worried that they're getting screened out. One of the worst things our schools have done is taken out all the hands-on classes. I know a guy that's dyslexic, ADHD, probably autistic, stutterer, owns a big metal fabrication company. And I'm going to start showing you where we're losing skills in this country because we've taken skilled trades out of the schools. Losing visual thinkers are ending up in the basement playing video games when they ought to be building things. Thomas Edison was labeled a hyperactive high school dropout. Fortunately, his mother gave him a really good education. Where would he end up today? Jane Goodall did her famous work. She only had a 2-year secretarial degree. Would she be able to do that today? You know, that's an example of getting in the back door. Steven Spielberg was dyslexic, bullied in school. I got bullied in high school. The only places I had friends was shared interests, things like electronics, model rockets, horses. But one of the things that saved Steven is he had a childhood Super 8 movie camera. You see, he got exposed to his profession early. You can't get interested in something unless you're exposed. Michelangelo grew up and every church was doing fantastic art, and he could probably just walk over to them and see fantastic art being made. So he grew up in that environment. We got to keep these classes. Musical instruments, woodworking, theater. This is all the stuff that doesn't work online. Now, a lot of the things like computer programming and statistics class, a lot of the STEM classes, a lot of those work online. Theater doesn't work online very well. Welding certainly doesn't work online. But we need people in these professions. Also, doing creative things with your hands, the scientist that does this is more likely to win a Nobel Prize. There was actually a study done on this. Steve Jobs, bullied in school, he loved calligraphy. And I've been following all Elon Musk stuff. When he gives a tour of his Tesla car factory, you can see that he loves his car factory. And one of the things he said is too many people are just going into finance and things like that instead of actually making stuff. No, we need to be actually making stuff, solving problems. I've been following the research on vaccines and the research on repurposing of old drugs for COVID. I think they've done a lousy job. Spend too much time researching expensive things rather than just trying to figure out how to find stuff that works. Einstein didn't have any speech till age 3. He had a creative hobby. It was music and playing the violin. I really liked what David Baresh had to say about humanities in the university curriculum, the connection between Steve Jobs and so-called useless humanities programs such as calligraphy should not be ignored. No, we need these sort of things. We've got teenagers today that don't know how to hook up a garden hose. They're totally separated from real stuff. I recently talked to a student, and I was looking at her shoes, and I said, yeah, those came from a foreign country. How did they get here? And I showed her pictures of a container ship. She didn't know what a container ship was. She had absolutely no idea how those shoes got from a factory in a foreign country to the US. And then I asked her, where do movies live online? Okay, where are all the videos that are online? And she goes, yeah, it's on a server somewhere. But she had absolutely no idea the magnitude of a data center. So we looked that up, aerial views and then inside. There's people that think they live in the cell phone tower in a satellite. I don't know, you couldn't put all those movies in the cell phone tower. No, that's not where they live. This was a neat little article about how kids really like to do real things. Maybe I'm not going to give an electric drill to a kid that young, but we need to be getting kids using tools. We've got kids today that have never made a paper airplane, never made cut out a snowflake. And then when they grow up and they go to medical school, guess what? They're having a hard time learning how to sew up a cut. They're having a hard time learning surgery because they've never done any hands-on things. And I loved this kindergarten that was taking broken computer parts and letting the kids build things out of them. We got a gigantic shortage of skilled trades. Don't stick your nose up at this stuff. We need people to fix things. And I have to say, I'm now seeing this building, this very fancy-dancy tech place. And the drafting department got stuck in the tunnels with the cable trays. I have to say, now every time I see a cable tray, I get mad. Yes, least in the meatpacking industry. You know what? In the meatpacking industry, we're really democratic. Everybody has a horrible office over the boiler room that shakes. Everybody does. Been there, been in those offices. Yeah, because you need to have the whole team. These jobs aren't going to get replaced by computers anytime. Had a chance to go out and visit Apple. That was a lot of fun. And yep, they're looking for coders. Now, as I moved back and forth between the world of going to an autism meeting and my world of travel ended on March 12th. Everything's been canceled, going online. But I'd go to an autism meeting. Then I'd visit a place like Apple, where half the programmers are on the spectrum, and they're like the guy in the Big Bang Theory says, no, I don't have autism. Or some of the people I worked with that grew up, doing skilled trades. And then I see a smart kid where nobody even thought to even introduce him to computer programming. One thing I tell parents is all the cool websites they can go to. You want to learn about quantum computing? I know how to look up the websites. I don't understand them. I know how to look them up. You go, quantum computing, linear algebra. I don't understand it, but I know how to look up this website. And that's the kind of thing that if I gave that to the right kid, he's going to take off with it. Because I'm seeing kids that are mathematically talented, and nothing's being done to develop their math ability. People don't think they just look up the stuff. It's right there. It's free online. Oh, I'm amazed. I'll tell you one thing I do know how to do online. I know how to surf. That's something I know how to do, how to find stuff online. Well, that's a little book I did of my childhood projects, just to get kids out making stuff, doing stuff when they're little. Now, when you're weird, how do you sell your work? I would show portfolios of my work. Like this is one of my drawings, the cattle handling facility, hand-done drawing. Now everything's done with computers. I watched the industry switch over in the mid-90s. And one of the things I noticed is the industry started to switch over. We got strange mistakes on drawings. Things like the center of the circle was not in the center of the circle. Because you had somebody doing a drawing who had never built anything and had never drawn by hand. Just last year, I got a really awful set of drawings. It had all the reinforcing rod left out. They had basically just drawn a schematic for some steel and concrete work, instead of drawing in exactly how to put in the rebar. And they said, well, we put that in the verbal specs. I can tell you, you're going to get ripped off by contractors if you give them drawings that bad. You got to draw all that stuff in. They simply weren't seeing it. Now, one of the ways I learned how to read blueprints is back in the 70s. I got this beautiful, big, hand-done, gorgeous set of drawings of the Swift plant in Tolleson, Arizona. Every machine, everything was on that drawing. I walked around to that plant till I could relate every line on that drawing to something in the plant. When you're weird, you got to show potential customers a portfolio of your work. So there's one of the pictures from my original portfolio. Now, if it's computer programming, you show off some of the code that you've done. You show the work. I love the fact that the HBO movie made replicas of my jobs. They showed very accurately how I think visually, and all the cattle stuff was accurate. That really turned me on. That was my brochure, black and white. Printing, because color printing back in the 70s and 80s was too expensive. It was called 4-color printing. It had to go through the printing press 4 times. That's not how they do it now. And I would just show my stuff off. That's what I did. So what are some common denominators of people that are different? Growing up with lots of books and learning. Well, I had problems learning to read when I was in 3rd grade. Mother taught me phonics. Another kid may pick up, sight words. Early exposure to career interests. I cannot emphasize that enough. That's true for Michelangelo, Beethoven, Einstein, a whole bunch of people. Learning how to work. That's a big problem I'm seeing today for a lot of kids that are different. Mentors. I had great teachers when I was young. I had a great, wonderful science teacher who got me studying, because now studying became a pathway to a career. You didn't just study for the sake of studying. You studied so you could get going somewhere else. Pathway to a career. Internships. Can't emphasize enough the importance of internships. I was reading an article just today in the Wall Street Journal about student internships this summer with COVID. Some were great. Yeah, there's the interns and the CEO rattling around in an empty office building. That was a perfect internship. And then others just got them canceled, which was really sad. But you need to go out there, try jobs on. Before COVID hit, I talked to one of the agents for one of the airlines. We got to yakking. Her daughter went into engineering, and she tried out airplanes for one internship and farm equipment for another internship. She decided she liked the aviation better. But that's why it's so important. Try on careers. Now, that's some of the stuff I used to like to do as a teenager. I got friends through shared interests. And when I was in high school, we had to build our model rockets. Now you can buy them ready-made. No. That's a real SpaceX launch. I was there. Talk about geek out cool. Yep, that was just so cool watching that. Now, some of these kids, get fixated on cars. So what you got to do with these kids is, let's read about cars, do physics with cars, learn how they work, take that interest and broaden it. Because what I'm finding, and I was going to all of these autism meetings, I went to one in Houston. I had NASA space scientists' grandparents coming up to me and finding out that they were on the autism spectrum when their grandkids got diagnosed. I was out at a big tech meeting and I had a computer programmer dad come up to me. And his son was autistic. You see, autism is a continuous trait. A brain can be more cognitive or thinking, or a brain can be more social emotional. And most of these grandparents had decent jobs because they had learned how to work. Now, there's a lot of genetics in this. People with autism tend to have more relatives in technical careers. That's certainly true in my family. They have bipolar, which is almost too much emotion, more creative careers. I love this paper. Genomic trade-offs. Are autism and schizophrenia the steep price for human brain? The same genes that make the brain big also cause autism and schizophrenia, because you got to have a rapid development of stem cells. And brain's a complicated thing. Genetics can't tell every brain cell where to go. So you're going to get variation. And I really love this quote from Thomas Edison, because I'm pretty sure he was a visual thinker. I'm not a mathematician. I can always hire a mathematician, but they can't hire me. I'm going to be showing you some more things why we need our visual thinkers. Maybe I can't do algebra, but I'm going to show you some things that I can do. In my book, The Autistic Brain, I present some of the science for different kinds of thinking. There was a fascinating paper I just read in the last few months about looking at how the industrial design department, that's going to be the art minds, and the engineering minds approach a design project. They approach it in different ways that are complementary. And I'm worried that our educational system is screening out the visual thinkers with some of the algebra requirements. To this day, I've never passed algebra. Thank goodness in '67 it wasn't required. But you need us. You need us to prevent messes like Fukushima. I've been researching that. I'll tell you why it happened. They didn't put in watertight doors. The engineers calculated risk, but I could see water coming over the seawall, flooding the site, drowning the emergency cooling pumps. What do you think's going to happen? You see, a visual thinker can see risk. Mathematicians calculate risk. Well, I worked on researching Fukushima, and I just found out there was 2 Fukushimas. One that drowned with a horrible mess, and one that survived. And the one that survived was on a little higher ground. It had a few watertight doors. And then it had this brilliant guy named Masada, and he was written up in the Harvard Business Review. And he had 3 reactors with the cooling shut off. He had like 1 generator. He got giant extension cords, ran them from the generator to each pump. He was a guy that had worked there all his life. They said he knew every nook and cranny in that plant. He saved it. That was Fukushima number 2 that survived. That's the kind of guy that was probably a visual thinker. He says, I got to get power to those pumps. And fortunately, some of the real critical stuff was protected by a watertight door. It had some protection. Watertight doors are low-tech stuff. Then I went and looked up Fukushima. Let me tell you, they got watertight doors now. Real impressive ones. They really look cool when you look them up online. All right, let's look at the Boeing MAX mess. You know, engineers have their jargon. Possible impact with terrain, that's jargon for crashing. They don't want to come out and just say, well, the plane crashes. It has impact with terrain. So then I followed the whole Boeing MAX thing, and I found out what an angle of attack sensor was. It's a little tiny thing right there. It's about the size of a Sharpie pen. Measures air angle. And they had the plane's active flight controls directly wired up to that, and they forgot to tell the pilots. I'm going, you got to be kidding. Nobody asked the question, what happens if a bird just snaps it off? What's it going to do? Made the plane go into a dive. See, when you think about it visually, it's real simple. I can't believe they made this mistake. They trusted a single, physically delicate sensor. They made a pile of other mistakes, too. And, yeah, the plane's instruction manual is, they're going to end up in court over that one. But the first mistake was trusting a single, physically delicate sensor. And when I found out what that was, I started looking at them on every plane at the airport, and I'm going, you got to be kidding. Because on most aircraft, they just act as an aid to the pilot. They're not wired to the flight controls. People complain that we lack common sense. I'm beginning to think that common sense is visualization. Okay, I see water flooding the Fukushima site. I don't know how to design a nuclear reactor. All I know is if that pump doesn't run, I'm in so much trouble, it's not funny. I'm in so much horrible trouble. Well, and I can't get an electrically operated pump wet. It's that simple. I've also learned, as I've been researching more of the literature, that there's some people that have aphantasia, including some engineers. They have no visual thinking at all. It's all abstract pattern thinking. People that have extreme aphantasia, if I said to you now, think about walking into your home right now, most people can see that. They score good scores on object rotation, the kinds of tests that mathematicians are good at. They don't have visual imagery. They might have a hard time imagining what visual imagery is. And then you get into some of the discussions about whether or not animals are conscious. I can't believe that that's still being discussed. And I think it gets down to if you think completely verbally, you might have a hard time understanding the dog could actually think. We need visual thinkers in science. I review a lot of journal articles, and the part I review is the methods. Little differences in methods can make a big difference in whether or not an experiment's going to work or change the results. I look at a lot of papers and they don't tell me the breed of cattle they used. Were they cows or were they bulls? What did you feed your animals? How did you house them? Just simple, basic things like that get left out of the methods. And that can totally change the results. There's been a lot of problems with not being able to duplicate results. And a lot of it gets down to methods. Not explaining exactly what media you used in a microbiology experiment. Messing up cell lines that get contaminated. Just basic stuff. I really love this, Marine Innovation Boot Camp. You give a bunch of Marines a pile of junk, and you say, make a vehicle out of it. You know who does the best job at this? The truck mechanics. They're the ones that can make a truck out of a pile of junk. They're the visual thinkers who see how they can take this junk and make something out of it. You need to have both kinds of minds. Now let's get into my field, big processing plants. Visual thinkers like me, you'll have a guy with the label of draftsman, and he lays out the whole entire plant. Please don't give us the passages with the cable trays and give you guys the fancy offices. There's a particular building, I won't tell you where it is, that when I looked at it just yesterday, it made me really mad. Said, don't put me in the basement of that fancy building because you need us. And this visual thinker, maybe a high school graduate with a CAD drafting degree, laying out a whole entire big meat plants. And what I have found on the division of labor, there's a kind of engineering I call the clever engineering department. They make the very clever machines that are clever mechanically. And then the more mathematical degreed engineers, they do the boilers, the refrigeration, the roof trusses. That's the stuff we don't understand. All the people I worked with, we never touched boilers. We don't understand them, and they're dangerous. And what's happening is the visual thinkers are retiring and they're not getting replaced. And we are losing skills. See that right there? In the last 4 years, 2 big poultry plants and 2 big gigantic pork plants just got built. And in the poultry plants, all the specialized equipment was imported. 100 shipping containers. We don't make it anymore. We're not making elevators anymore. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're not making anymore. And it's because we took skilled trades out. See that? All that equipment in there? It's imported. And it's because we've lost the skills. And it's imported from high-wage countries. Very expensive to import. Because we don't have the quirky different kinds of guys and gals learn how to make things, start a little shop, and the little shop then gradually grows into a great big shop. This is the Steve Jobs Theater. I am standing in the middle of it screaming right now. When you scream in the middle of the Steve Jobs Theater, it vibrates in the absolute coolest way, except I wasn't feeling too cool about it. That's a carbon fiber roof. Look at those glass walls. No support columns. The electrical stuff that's inside the seams. It's from Italy and Germany. The entire thing. I found the website of the company that made it. And I was screaming, we don't make it anymore. No, they came from Europe. Ski lifts, we're not making those either. These are a whole lot of things that I call the clever engineering department. Train cars, that's another thing we're behind on. Now I'd like to talk about some pioneers. Grace Murray Hopper, computer programming pioneer. Now, one of the things with minds that are different is they have uneven skills. She failed in Latin, brilliant in math. We need to be getting into more emphasis on building up what the person can do. I get asked to talk to a lot of people in disability meetings, and there's a tendency to overgeneralize. You might have a person that's using a wheelchair. They need a very different accommodation than somebody that's got autism that may just need a quiet place to work. Stephen Hawking couldn't write, so he had to do all his mathematics in his head. He was very good at doing mathematics in his head. And he used Penrose tiling, patterns, pure patterns. Now, wouldn't this be fun stuff to show some kids in 3rd and 4th grade? There's some more tiling patterns. There's some graphene quasi-crystals. You want to really look up something cool if you're into math? Go onto Google Images and look up protein symmetry. You'll be amazed at the patterns you see when you look up protein symmetry. And they're inside your body. Oh, wow. Really cool. Plants have cool patterns. Then when I look through my science and nature, I'm seeing all these cool, beautiful geometric patterns in material science, in biology. Okay, this is for the math kids. Fractals. Here's great, really cool stuff in material science. Now, the thing that Stephen Hawking had to say about disability is he said, concentrate on those things your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. He could do 2 things really well. Math in his head, and he could float around in the weightless plane. He could do both of those things really, really super well. Now, if you think verbally, people tend to be a top-down, vague, very vague kind of things. Like I was just on a Zoom conference this morning talking with parents of kids with autism, and they'll ask questions like, what do you do in the classroom? Really, really general kind of questions. Now, I'm a bottom-up thinker. When I started thinking about COVID and where people were getting infected, I'm now thinking, okay, meatpacking plant, prison, cruise ship. Okay, now I'm visualizing these places. What do they have in common? Tons of people packed into a tight airspace with probably no air changes. And what's showing up in the meat plants is a lot of the infections were happening in the locker room and the cafeteria. Some are happening on the plant floor, but not all of them. But you see, I'm taking specific examples. Okay, aircraft carrier, that's even worse for a confined space. You see, and I'm going, now what is the common factor that these different environments have where COVID just spread through like bam? People jammed together, bars, really super bad. People shouting, no masks on. Concepts are formed with specific examples. Okay, then you think about places where they're weren't getting COVID. Okay, there were some demonstrations. There were very few infections there. Outside, and they constantly were moving. They were walking and moving. Okay, how's that different than the cruise ship? See, I'm thinking about taking specific examples and putting them into categories. Top-down verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize. Now, the thing is I would pick up on the sensory detail. Now, there's a phone app now that can diagnose skin cancer. Now, we got to start, thinking about what are some of the things that we do with AI? What if hackers got into it? Oh, I'm appalled at the stuff that hackers are getting into right now. I'm going to talk about just a few things for the minds that work differently. Then we're going to open it up to lots and lots of questions, because that's what I really like doing. Can't remember the steps in the task in some task, give them a little pilot's checklist. I'm seeing too many kids getting too addicted to video games and going nowhere. No, we've got to figure out how we can take them, get them doing things. I'm teaching the little kids. When I was a little kid and people talked really fast, it just went into gibberish. So when people slowed down, then I understood. And problems with sensory oversensitivity. This can really be a problem. There's a lot of people on the autism spectrum, they're going to need a quiet place to work. They may be doing a lot better if they can work at home. But the thing is, if you wear your headphones all the time, it's going to make you more sensitive. Have them with you, but then try not to wear them all the time. One of the big problems I'm seeing today with kids on the spectrum, and kids that ought to be going into computer programming, they ought to be going into a skilled trade. They're not learning how to work, because they don't have paper routes. They're not learning enough life skills. It's sort of getting to the point where their whole identity gets tied up with autism. Maybe this is one of the reasons why in Silicon Valley they avoid the labels. But where the label can help is on relationships. Understanding that, see, I get turned on like watching the SpaceX launch, or I designed a project and it worked really well. That really turns me on. I get turned on by intellectual things, really cool stuff. The more normal people get along, it's all about relationships. But the first step is realizing that you think differently. I think we got to start looking at what is the ultimate goal of education. Where is a student 10 years after they graduate from college? I was building this project right here in the 70s. And see, it's in black and white. That's what I was doing. That was shown in the movie really nicely. I spent 25 years in the construction industry, and it affects how I think about things. Because in construction, you got to finish projects. You got to get stuff done. And I had a great mentor in the construction industry. There he is right now, Jim Uhl, the contractor. And he encouraged me. But when I was first asked to design this job, I was only at the 60% level of knowledge. And I said, give me 3 weeks. I had no idea how to do the concrete reinforcement. Understood the cattle handling part. Well, I had to get on the phone, track stuff down, and learn it. I didn't try to wing it. I had to track it down and learn it. Well, I think maybe might just end right there, maybe do a few questions. And then if people are still interested, I got a few slides on animal behavior, but maybe it's just better now to do some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Grandin. So we'll open this now up to questions, and we've already got a couple of them already. So I will publish them and read them to Temple, and she can answer those. So the first question I'll publish is, all right, so I'm not seeing the three, I'm not seeing the publishing.
So you're seeing the questions back
I'm
there.
s-
Maybe you can just tell me from back there. I'll repeat the question.
I'm not seeing the published questions. I selected published, but there's nothing showing up. Technical difficulty here. Be
Well,
patient.
maybe you can just ask me the questions from back there then.
So first question. I'm a very visual learner. How do I make sure I'm learning effectively in my classes here at CSU?
Well, the first thing I'd want to ask is which classes? You know, I found as a visual thinker, I loved biology. You know, where I got into trouble was with some of the more abstract math. I got through statistics, I had to be tutored and tutored and tutored. And I get worried about the clever engineering department, basically as skilled trades. And in working on these big food factories, I discovered how much the skilled trades guys actually were inventing.
I'm not seeing
And I
the
didn't
published.
realize how serious this problem was
Oh, there it is.
until I went to this two big pork processing plants 3 years ago and found out they'd imported all the equipment. See, mainly I was working with beef. Beef we were still making. And it was a shock. Then I started shopping online for to outfit a warehouse for online fulfillment center. I went shopping online for that. The best stuff is European. You want the fanciest automated warehouse, it's from the UK. Oh, container ship port, went shopping. Europe and China. You know, this is really a concern. You know, you've got to have the whole team. And I think that, and the thing that's happened is that the person that makes the clever engineering usually only has a high school education. Don't shove us down there with the cable trays. You know, everybody needs to be down in the basement with the cable trays then, like we do in the meat industry. But I've been in the meat industry for 47 years, and it was just 4 years ago that I realized the extent of how much skills have been lost. I was shocked.
Next
And that
question.
picture I showed you, that was, I can put it back on that, just so you can look at that. Oh, there it is. We don't make it anymore. A lot of complicated stuff there. That picture's the plant's 4 years old.
Next question.
Yeah, the thing is, I'd need more information. This
Yeah.
is an example of asking a question where there's not enough information. What is the class? What is the problem? I had to be tutored in statistics. I got through it with a C as in Charlie. A lot of tutoring. And when I failed my first quiz, I did something about it. So letting myself just flunk out. I wanted
So
to
you
do
sought,
engineering.
you sought out help.
I sought out, but when I was in Arizona, I used to drive by the Motorola plant. I wanted the job in there so bad. One of the reasons why I ended up in the meatpacking industry, it's a no barrier of entry industry. So basically what I did was the clever engineering department. I knew how to do up through my 6th grade old-fashioned math just fine. Things like find the area of a cylinder, figure out hydraulic pressures, diameter cylinder, diameter of the rod. That stuff was easy for me to do because it wasn't abstract. Well, I used to deliberately design equipment. So if the house air was a certain house air, I'd design it so that on max house air, they couldn't over-squash the cattle. And I did that on purpose. I'd size the cylinders accordingly on a piece of equipment that restrained the cattle.
Next question
Okay.
comes from Mignon. Have you ever heard of the projects of artist and engineer Don Rosengard? And if so, what do you think of his works? I love his stuff, and he seems to be a good example of implementing visual experience into modern learning and environmental
I would
solutions.
have to look it up. I'm sorry, I
You're
just
not
don't
familiar
know.
with-
I'll have to look it up.
We'll have to follow up on that.
Let's look at the Steve Jobs Theater. Oh man, I screamed in there. Oh, and the whole thing just vibrated.
Next question. Dr. Grannon, you mentioned ADHD. Is ADD connected to this idea of divergent thinking?
Well, yes, autism and ADHD or ADD, there's a lot of genetic crossover, but yes, it is. The way it works with the autistic mind is they can kind of go into different specialties. They can be an extreme object visualizer like me. They can be an extreme math mind, which is the visual spatial, or a verbal thinker that can learn foreign languages, knows tons of historical facts. But the person tends to be good at one thing, really terrible at something else. You almost always have uneven skills. And I worked with machinery designers that were just brilliant. And they were taking the high school drafting class or welding class. And I didn't realize the skills loss till this trip to Steve Jobs Theater in this plant, and the poultry plant's worse. 100 shipping containers from Europe. Oh, and they slap a maintenance contract on it too that's just unreal.
Another question. I'll publish this one. As a visual thinker, and sometimes I have a hard time communicating to a mathematical thinker and expressing the idea, how can I present my ideas to someone who approaches life from a mathematical standpoint?
Well, the first step is realizing that you think differently. The first, I didn't learn until I was in my 40s that other people weren't visual thinkers. See, the first step is realizing that there are different ways that people think, and there's different ways that people do emotion. That's the first step. And when I look at accidents like Fukushima, what I learned was they didn't see the water flood in the site. Watertight doors, that's ancient, simple technology. Yep, and then after Fukushima flooded, I looked up a bunch of stuff. Yes, they called up every watertight door vendor in the world after that. But by then it was kind of, too late. They don't see it. See, this is where you need different kinds of minds. The angle of attack sensor, when I found out what that was, I'm going, you wired the plane's flight computer directly to that thing and you didn't tell the pilots? Like, that's super basic. You don't have to be an aviation engineer to know what you do. And I think in the beginning, it was an innocent not seeing it. Now, the instruction manual, that's not so innocent. Mm-hmm. But originally, I think it was an innocent visual thinking mistake.
Next question. As someone who has been working with horses for a while, there seems to be people who identify as being better with communicating, understanding animals. Do you think there is a particular type of thinker that is more predisposed to feeling more connected to animals in this way?
Well, let me just go on a few other extra slides I got here. Now, visual thinking helped me in my work with animal behavior because an animal lives in a sensory-based world. And the first thing I ever did with cattle handling is I noticed little things that would make the cattle refuse to move forward, like maybe a sunbeam. This is a picture I took on the sidewalk in front of our library. These are eclipse shadows right in front of our library. I watched 100 students walk over that and not see it. You see, an animal's world is sensory-based. So a lot of people that are super good with animals tend to be visual thinkers. Like here's a chain hanging down in a chute, or there's a paper towel waving. I've seen paper towels about shut off a slaughterhouse. They won't walk by the paper towels, and they take out the paper towels that are doing this. Then they go in. But being a visual thinker definitely did help me my work with animal behavior because it's a sensory-based world. You've got to get away from words to understand, that an animal actually has an internal life. And I'll put those eclipse shadows back up there. And that's just the way, what's happening there is you got little tiny mini eclipses. And I go, oh, look at those funky shadows. Mm-hmm. And this happened right when classes were changing. And they were walking right over it. not noticing it. I noticed it, took that picture.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. Have you seen evidence of autism being underdiagnosed in women compared to in men?
Yes, yes. So the thing is, it's not as evident and doesn't show up as obvious in women. Yes, that's happened. Now, the other question I get asked all the time is autism increased? I think it's increased detection. First of all, to get any kind of special service in the public school, you have to have a diagnosis. And so, like, the mildest cases are getting diagnosed. You know, the kid's just a little bit socially awkward. There's no such thing as just, oh, a little help with reading or something like that. And the other thing that's a problem is that social behaviors aren't taught the way they were taught in my generation, where kids had to sit down at the dining room table and you were taught to say please and thank you, and much more formal teaching of those things that's not being done today.
So, another question. Which building at CSU inspires you the most? Which building do you think was designed with the help of the visual thinkers?
Well, I want to talk about a building that has an interesting job career path. People need to get better at finding back doors. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I go up to the editor of the Farm and Ranchman magazine to get his card, because I realized if I wrote for that magazine, that would help my career. Well, I toured the construction site of the new chemistry building, and there's a lady named Tina. She was project manager for that building. And I asked her, how'd you get that job? She's got a 4-year political science degree, got a job with Hasseldan Construction answering phones. Well, when she's answering phones, she gets to talk to all the vendors, talk to all the customers. Then she started working on some bidding. Next thing you know, she's running the project. That's an example of the back door. And every time I look at the chemistry building, it's a beautiful building, I think about Tina, because I'm really interested in helping people to, to find back doors into good jobs. Half of all good jobs are through connection. When I was out at Apple, I ran into a guy in one of their little restaurants. He was from the Midwest, and I said, how'd you end up here? His professor in the Midwest knew somebody at Apple. You see, that's back door. That's knowing people. Internships, well, that's a little more front door. But half of all decent jobs, it's knowing the right people.
Considering the adversity you faced growing up, how did you remain so motivated to pursue your passions and interests?
Well, there were some people that helped me. There were people that were bad to me. There was a scene in the movie where they put bull testicles on my vehicle. That actually happened. That was the foreman level. It was the foreman levels. They did the bad things to me. The owners of the feed yards, for the most part, were really good and really helpful, and they recognized some of my abilities. There were some good people in the cattle industry that helped me.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Charlotte. In your experience, what is the greatest contribution to the decline in visual thinkers in the skilled workforce?
Well, I think part of the problem is draconian algebra requirements. Algebra doesn't make any sense to me. And the other thing is, I looked up just recently in the last month the core curriculum, core standards for first, second, and third grade math. And I'm going, you've got to be kidding. What happened to borrowing and subtraction? The other thing is, some schools, they want you to do that all in your head. I can't do it in my head. If I hadn't been allowed to mark the paper on borrowing and subtraction, I couldn't do it. We're screening kids out. For most skilled trades, you need up through 6th grade the way math was taught in the 50s. I can find the area of a cylinder. I can do the hydraulic cylinder calculations, where I'm relating the math back to something real. That I can do. And I've worked in these shops, and then you look at this equipment that's not being made here anymore. We used to make all this stuff, because what's happening is you're not getting that guy who took welding class starting a little tiny shop. Then he makes something for some factory somewhere, and then it grows into a big shop. That's not happening. But you see, in Europe, they've kept those skilled trades, and they don't stick their nose up at it the same way. We're taking our skilled tradespeople and some fancy companies, stick them in a tunnel full of cable trays. At least my industry doesn't do that. Everybody gets stuck in with the cable trays. And the thing is, you need both kinds of minds. Look at Fukushima, look at Boeing. That's where someone needs to say, you got to wire that to 2 sensors, period. Plane's got 2, why didn't you use them? That's a very basic question. Someone's going to say, well, if I break it off, what happens? Well, the computer went into auto dive. And then you should have heard Captain Sullenberger. That's the guy who landed on the Hudson after he did the simulator, full motion simulator that was set up to duplicate both accidents. He was a really angry Sully when he came out of there. And he called it a death trap. He knew exactly what it was going to do. No, it's a mistake that should have been stopped right in the beginning. But if you try to calculate it, you don't see it. I can see a bird just ripping that thing off. Or a mechanic putting a ladder against it or something.
I have a question from Veronica. How do you recommend being a hands-on learner during COVID with all the online courses?
I think it's a big problem. You're not going to be teaching welding online. I had to get my class online. My drawing assignment went better than I thought it was going to, because we showed them how to do it online. But there's a lot of stuff. I mean, how are you going to teach surgery at the vet school online? There's a lot of hands-on things that are not going to work online. It's just that simple. Now, a lot of the classes, more traditional engineering classes, math, and those work fine online. There's some stuff you cannot do online. And they're going to just have to do it in small groups and get a lot of air changes in the shop. And, okay, we're socially distancing right here. Hope I don't get COVID. No, but we have a huge shortage of mechanics, and not enough respect is given for that kinds of thinking. And I'm working right now on a new book on visual thinking, and I found out there was a second Fukushima that was saved by an old guy, been there a long time. He didn't call them extension cords, but when I told it to my student, Cora goes, oh, giant extension cords. That's basically what he did. Got to get those pumps running. And fortunately, they did have a watertight door that protected some of this equipment. And they were a little bit higher elevation. They didn't have complete watertight doors, but it was a little bit better protected. But if that guy hadn't have done that, there would have been Fukushima number 2 burning up. Harvard Business Review article about it. It's real interesting.
Let's see. So, if I feel I learn well, whether it is visual, hands-on, or by listening, how do I identify what my strongest way of learning is?
Well, let's look at what you're interested in, too, because that's really important. And the first thing I'd be asking this student would be, what interests you? You see, one of the bad things about taking so many of these classes out of high school is kids aren't getting exposed to enough stuff to figure out what they might want to do. I mean, just take one example here. At our department, 75% come in and want to be veterinarians because that's the only animal thing they've been exposed to. Then when they get to the junior year, they find out you can be a geneticist or a nutritionist. These are careers they didn't even know about until they got here. You can do them with a 4-year degree. Now, these are things I'd want to ask the student more questions like, what interests you? What are your good subjects? What are your hard subjects? That's one way to kind of figure out what kind of thinker you are. But the thing that's been learned about the object visualizer and the mathematical visual spatial, you're not going to have a super genius in both of those in the same person. Now, you're going to have a lot of middle-of-the-road people, but they're opposite traits. That's some of the new research. But the thing is, you need the whole team. And we got to go back and commune with the Steve Jobs Theater. Stuff we're not making anymore. Man, it made a weird sound when I screamed in there.
Another question. How should one go about being heard when presenting ideas? It is not always the loudest that is heard, but being a mix of both thinking methods, I usually get dismissed by either side. What is the best way to appeal to the different thinking styles?
Well, what I used to do, the way I used to sell jobs, is I'd go in there and spread the drawings out on the table. Now you'd have them on a computer, show pictures off of jobs. That's how I sold the jobs. Now the thing that's hard is I need to, there's a tendency to dismiss the visual thinkers. I had a very interesting conversation with a guy who makes the devices that deploy satellites. Okay, you got your big expensive satellite, your big expensive rocket. Now if it gets up there and it doesn't come out of the nose cone, you're wrecked. The idea for one of the satellite deployment devices he got from an automatic car trunk that opens. He's got like the car trunk, he's got one I call the golden milk crate. It's things that look like drawers. He has everybody for clients. I looked at his client list. Spy satellites, SpaceX, you name it. His stuff works. Makes it in a little shop. And he got a lot of ideas from things like car trunk latches. He goes out and buys an impact wrench at Home Depot and takes it apart, uses ideas from that. That's visual thinking. This is a guy that had a very difficult time in engineering school. He got through it, C's in math. Well, the Defense Department hires him, NASA hires him. You want your satellite to deploy. If it doesn't deploy, your whole mission's wrecked. You've lost the satellite and the rocket. No, I had a chance to interview with him, and I've been on his website, looked at all his stuff. You need those kind of thinkers. C student in math and engineering, barely got through.
Another question. How did you find your passions and interests?
I was exposed to it. I came from a non-ag background. When I went away to a boarding school in New Hampshire that had little dairy, got interested in dairy cows. Then at 15, I went out to my aunt's ranch in Arizona and got exposed to beef cattle. I got exposed to it. Hadn't been exposed to it, I wouldn't have been doing something with beef cattle. Steven Spielberg had a movie camera when he was a child. Michelangelo grew up, every church was doing big art commissions. And he grew up in a family of stone cutters. A lot of the tools for stone cutting and sculpture are the same. Exposure. Even though his dad hated art, he still got exposed to it. You got to get exposed to stuff to get interested in it. And I get to thinking now, what do we do with the kid that flunked algebra? I talked to one family in the Southeast. I said, you see that Amazon warehouse? It's a door. You go down there, work your hindy off in there. You work it really hard. When something breaks, you fix it. You know what you can do 10 or 15 years later? Design the warehouse of the future. I have seen that career path in the meat industry. I have seen people do that. That is a doable career path. No, that's clever engineering department. Yeah, the good stuff's coming from Germany now for fulfillment centers. No, I've done serious shopping online for this stuff. I'm very, very concerned about losing skills.
Here's an intriguing question from Cassidy. How do you think that boys and girls learn differently? Do you think that there is opportunities for both in schools?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, there's a lot of variation, between people. And how they think, also how they feel. I get turned on by what I do. Like, to me, to watch, how many people are going to watch 2.5 hours of space station docking live feed? I did that. Geeked out on all of it. And then I was watching the automatic translation thing that was making the subtitles. They got to talking about their food and it said puppies. Well, those the automatic translator things, they worked pretty good, but I was on one Zoom conference to Portuguese in Brazil, and a professor got introduced, instead of a professor of animal science, as a professor of AutoZone, the company sells auto parts. Sometimes it comes up with some really goofy stuff. But I was just geeking out on that whole thing, and the astronauts are talking about their food, and they're talking about, well, before they dock, they got to get the computer said, "Did you put 3 bottles of water down the toilet?" Stuff like that.
A question from Brittany. What are your suggestions to make the best out of required courses that don't work well with your thinking style?
Well, I'm going to think of a course that I thought I was going to hate when I went to college, and it was English literature. I thought I was going to despise this course. Oh, we had a great teacher, and you know what I liked about it since I was socially awkward? They explained emotionally what the author was trying to get across in some of the things they wrote. And it actually was one of my favorite classes. Now, math, I had a ton of tutoring, had to get through that. But the English literature class was required. I thought I was going to despise the class. I loved it. You see, this is one of the reasons for making it so you don't get so narrow. Gym class I hated. We had this horrible class called body mechanics. I despised it. It was a stupid class. Sometimes you just have to do something stupid.
Another question? Do you find that the new requirements for many skilled trades deter visual thinkers from even considering a skilled trade as a career, disregarding the obvious systemic barriers in schools today?
Well, I'm worried algebra would be, screen them out. And there's things, if you're going to do quantum computing, you need linear algebra. You want to find the paper to show to some kid, type in quantum computing, linear algebra. I found the papers from MIT. I don't understand it, but I know how to find it for the kid that might understand it. But this is the problem. And let's just look at the Steve Jobs Theater again. How about some nice ski lifts we don't make? Elevators. Before COVID hit, I was doing a little elevator survey. Every hotel I went to, and I'd ask them how old the building was. If it was more than 15 years old, it was probably an Otis. If it was a newer hotel, it was a German elevator. And then when you look at, like in the airport, those glass elevators, and you can see the door mechanisms and things. I always like to look at those. Very, very clever. You see, that's the visual thinking stuff. You see, you need to have both. And I went in this fancy factory right here, this plant. I went on the slaughter line. They had a robotic arm in there. I don't know who made that because it had a plastic sleeve over it. But it had a very clever tool on the end of the arm, on the robotic arm. Very clever. Somebody just made it in a shop. It wasn't even electronic. Somebody made that in a shop. It wouldn't have been calculated. That's an example of the clever engineering department. All right, you take ice cream novelty machines. Yeah, wouldn't call them super important. But when I go to the big food show, and I said, well, who made up this really clever machine for making ice cream novelties with different stuff inside, or making cookies with swirls? Those all come out of Europe. You find out the guy in the shop made it. Then the degreed engineers perfect it. You take a lot of farm equipment, like rolling up hay. That's a radically different idea than smushing it in a box to make square bales. That guy in the shop, I went to a research place that did a big fish farming thing, elaborate stuff, and I could tell it all came from Home Depot, super clever. It was the maintenance man that made it. You see, and there's not enough respect. I went out to JPL, and they didn't think to take me to the machine shops. Well, you wouldn't have a Mars rover without machine shops. Now, that wasn't the place with the cable trays. That was somewhere else. We'll keep their name out of it. I'm really mad about that. You see that building, and I go, yeah, not my department got put in the basement in that fancy building. But the machine shops aren't given enough credit. Somebody had to make that Mars rover. They need to be getting the credit. See, this is the thing. And the clever engineering department really is important. That's all important right there. Yeah, look at it. I'm going to put that up there and make you look at it. I took that picture a couple of years ago. We were doing a training in that plant. And the Steve Jobs Theater, I took that last year. Now I've been grounded, so I don't get to go to these cool places anymore for a while.
Let's see. Well,
I looked up the website for and I can't remember the name of it, and you should have seen the fantastic buildings they had on that website. No, I found the website and it said installed, fabricated, the whole thing, company in Italy.
we have some students that would like to see the animal behavior slides. Do you want to just
All
share
right, yep, we can
briefly,
show a few of those.
just sort of parallels with animals?
Okay, all right. We already talked about this. Okay, then that's that's the dip vat system that they recreated for the movie. Now, one of the things that's super important is having non-slip flooring for animals. All right. How many of you saw that animal's looking at the sunbeam? If I show that to elementary school kids, over half the hands go up. I show that in the physics lab, no hands go up. If I show that at a zookeeper's meeting, you got a lot of people that are dyslexic, they'll see it. Look, it's obvious, he's looking right at it. You know, observation is really important. Animal memories are specific because they're sensory-based. Okay, for example, if you train an animal to tolerate a blue and white umbrella, that doesn't transfer to a tarp. My student, Megan Corian, just finished up a really cool piece of research where she took a children's play set. It's about 4 foot by 4 foot, about the size of a pallet. And, you know, it's got a slide, it's got a swing on it, it's brightly colored. Walked a horse by it multiple times. Horse got totally used to walking by it. And then take the play set, rotate 90 degrees. So the slide is now, instead of being this way, is this way. The horse views it as a new object. And we've got that paper submitted to a journal. She did an abstract, animal science meetings. You see, it visually looks different. Where most people would look at it and go, yeah, that's some kid's toy, and not think anything of it. But animal thinking specific, an umbrella looks very different than a tarp or a flag. And one of the best ways to train an animal to tolerate something new is to let them approach it on their own. Like decorate the pasture with flags and let the horse or the cattle just go up to them. Because a real common problem is people say, well, my horse was fine at home, it went berserk at the show. Well, you've got a lot of new things there like flags. There's a little piece of ribbon there, spook the cattle. This is a Cenetrac restrainer system that I designed. It's in all the big meatpacking plants. Worked with a really, really great machinery designer, high school graduate, no engineering degree, clever engineering department. I went down in Brazil and saw some other really good engineering on cattle restraint equipment, and the guy was embarrassed he didn't have an engineering degree. I looked at this piece of equipment and I'm going, you don't need an engineering degree. Clever engineering department. Now, these people don't do boilers, they don't do refrigeration, they don't do roof trusses, power. Yeah, that's for a degreed engineer. But these other things, it's a whole big pile of equipment. There's a side view of how the Cenetrac restrainer works. If you want to really see how this works, you can look up Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. And there's all the metal work there. And this is a piece of equipment I worked on in the 80s and the early 90s. All the big plants have it. So the next time you go out and have a steak, it probably went through this equipment. And we're losing the skills. Now, we've got one guy left that can build the entire beef plant. He can't do algebra. High school graduate, FFA, Future Farmers of America, welding class. He's building entire plants. We might be one heart attack away from losing that. But the sun's coming along really well. You're talking whole big factories here. And that's a job I designed in the 80s to show you some of the things that I've designed as an aerial view of a project back before there were drones, and those pictures were hard to get. The thing that I'm finding is I go out and I talk at autism meetings, is there's a lot of people that don't even know that I had a career in the livestock industry. They get so much into the autism. And then I developed a very simple way to evaluate the meat plants. Because one of the big problems they had is people want the magic new technology more than they want the management. And one of the big problems we had when we put this equipment in the early 90s, half my clients tore it up and wrecked it. So then I developed a very simple way to evaluate it. If you couldn't shoot 95% of the cattle dead on the first shot, you get kicked off the McDonald's approved supplier list. Real simple, really straightforward, just like traffic. You got to measure stuff. And this is the very simple 5-point scoring system. And you got cattle mooing and bellowing, and you're handling them, you're doing something bad to them. You better be at 3% or lower, or you don't sell to McDonald's. And in 1999, for 5 years, we were out there cleaning up the plants. And the thing that really made me happy, only 3 plants had to build expensive equipment. The rest we fixed with maintenance, removal of 3 plant managers, lots of supervision, non-slip flooring, lighting, the cattle are afraid of the dark, simple, simple things. So when we first started out, baseline data is pretty terrible. And then audits by big customers, what a difference it made. But it was an extremely simple scoring system. It's like traffic rules. You got to figure out what are the critical control points. In traffic, if you only enforced 5 things, you get 95% of your safety. Drunk driving, speeding, stopping violations, texting, and seatbelts. And the first 3 are the most important. It's figuring out what are the really important things to measure. And that's something that's really simple. It's worked beyond the wildest dreams. COVID's caused some setbacks because the auditors can't get into the plants. They're trying to do some of it on video. It works somewhat. But people ask me what I'm the proudest of. We made a lot of change with this. And people had a hard time understanding how could just measuring 5 simple things work. And then we had 6 acts of abuse that were an automatic failure. Well, the trick is it's just like the traffic. And I'll ask people, what's the 3 most important things to enforce? And some people, drunk driving, I have to prompt them to get that one. That's number 1. Now that I just want to finish up, and I learned that my thinking was different, that's the first step, is realizing that there is different kinds of thinking and that everybody's a member of the team. You need the whole team. That's the thing. Now, I know a guy who's not very academic, but boy, he's a good diesel mechanic. Somebody's going to have to fix those self-driving trucks. They got a lot of gadgets on them. Any more questions?
Let me see if any more have come up since last time I looked.
So I went through my behavior slides.
Oh, great. Here's a question. Do you have any advice for college students who are visual thinkers who struggle with math subjects but are going into STEM fields?
Well, this is the $60 million question because we need the clever engineering department. I can't do algebra. I'll never be able to do algebra. I've done tons of engineering. One of the reasons why I ended up in the meat industry, it's a no academic barrier of entry industry. So then my academics, I managed to stumble through statistics with a lot of tutoring. I've done tons of engineering work, tons. Boilers and refrigeration, I'm afraid of that stuff. I don't understand it. But I've done plenty of clever engineering department, plenty of it. And so has all the other people I worked with. That's the problem. We need the clever engineering department. And they're not going to be able to do algebra. They can learn to do math. See, normally if you're on a job, like if you're putting up pre-engineered buildings, you got to calculate roof trusses. So you can, you know, sort of like cookbook recipe, do a formula for roof trusses. You can learn that. But you need both. And Fukushima and the Boeing Max mess are 2 examples of why you need both. When I found out what an angle of attack sensor was, and I looked at them on planes at the airport, I was just shocked that they wired that directly to flight controls. And then when I found out they didn't tell the pilots, and the pilots were throwing a fit, like, you gotta be kidding. That's a very basic. It's totally basic. And then they tried to, then the plane's instruction manual, well, that's gonna end up in court.
Well, Temple, I think this has been wonderful. We appreciate the time you've taken to answer questions. There's a few more, but I
Well,
think it's...
one of the things I want to talk about the Clever Engineering Department, there's
Yep.
industrial design.
Yes.
There's industrial design. And there's more STEM engineers and industrial design need to get together. Because industrial design, you can get to do engineering without the math. But now there's stuff where I had to go in and have my drawings stamped because I did some stuff in an old hog yard that was sort of like a parking garage, and we were making holes in the floor, and that had to be checked out by a structural engineer. Yeah, we got those drawings stamped. I know when I got to refer. But industrial design is where the visual thinker needs to be. And we need the different kinds of minds. That's the thing. You have to have both, or we're going to have problems.
So perhaps an alternative for a visual thinker
Visual
might
thinker
be
to
in...
go over to industrial design. But then we need to be getting a lot more collaboration between the regular engineering department and industrial design. Don't stick your nose up at it. You're not better. You need to have both and get more industrial design. Instead of figuring out how to make a fancy case for a printer or something stupid like that, get the industrial design people more involved with some real engineering stuff, because you need to have both. I look at this mess where they got this building, I think it's in San Francisco or LA, that's sinking into the ground. I wouldn't give you 2 cents for an apartment in that building. Ugh. Well, they were too cheap to put the pilings down to bedrock. They should have listened to some old guy, probably a visual thinker, would have been telling them not to do it. Yeah, you need the different kinds of minds. They're all important. And you see in Europe, the skilled trades gets a lot more respect. Kids can either go kind of a skilled trades way, they don't stick their nose up at it. All I can say about our meat industry is democratic. Everybody gets the horrible office.
They don't put a lot of money in
No, I've been in the offices that vibrate because they're over the machinery room and the entire office shakes. Yep, been in those. Everybody's in it.
Well,
No,
thank you very
need to have
much.
both, but we need to be getting the more mathematically inclined engineering and the industrial design together, working on projects together, putting in their different ways of doing things. We need both. And I didn't realize how serious this problem was until I went to that pork plant almost 4 years ago now. Yeah, they had my stockyard. I designed the stockyard for that plant, but that's field fabricated. You're not putting steel and concrete work in shipping containers. But then once you got past my field fabricated stuff, I got a tour of the whole entire plant. I come out of there, I was looking at nameplates on machinery. I was going, oh man, this is bad. Then I went to a second big fancy dancy plant, and it was the same thing. Then the chicken plant a year later was worse. I'm going, wait a minute, we've got problems here. And it's beautiful equipment, beautiful equipment. I'm not faulting the equipment, I'm faulting how we're handling education right now. We've got some serious problems. You need us visual thinkers. Somebody should have been sitting in that conference room at Boeing, taking an angle of attack sensor and slide it down the conference room table right in the CEO's face and say, you want to trust one of these? Some old shop foreman doing that. No, they didn't have the old shop foreman tell them not to do it. That mistake hadn't been made, the planes would still be up in the air.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
It wouldn't have the terrible loss of human
Well, it's
life.
terrible. 2 plane loads of people killed.
Yeah.
It's totally terrible. Jillions of dollars of aircraft grounded. I mean, it's terrible. Yes, there are some issues of pilot training and stuff like that, but if that first mistake hadn't been made, those planes would still be up there flying around.
Well, Temple, thank you very much. Thank you, students, for attending this virtual lecture.
And I'm glad we had lots of people asking lots of questions, because
And
that's what I really
great
like.
questions. So we'll conclude this presentation. Again, we welcome you to the university, to the honors program, and wish you great success. And remember, we're here to support you.